Hello and welcome to Clusters. At the end of Acts chapter 23, Paul had arrived in Caesarea protected by a sizable contingent of Roman soldiers and had been handed over to await trial before the governor of Judea, a man named Felix. A few days later, at the start of chapter 24, Ananias, the high priest, and some of the Jewish elders turn up alongside a lawyer named Tertullus to present their case against Paul before Felix. Now, Antonius Felix is a man well known to history. He was the procurator of Judea between 52 and 60 AD. That means that because we're told in verse 27 that he held Paul in prison for 2 years before his successor took over, that these events are probably occurring in about 58 AD. Now, despite Tertullus's flattery in court, Felix was actually known to be both cruel and corrupt. He was certainly partial to bribes from prisoners desperate for their freedom. We see evidence of this in verse 26. Later in that same year of 58 AD, Jonathan, who succeeded Ananias as high priest, was actually assassinated on the orders of Felix. Jonathan had been highly critical of the governor and the way he ran Judea and had threatened to inform the emperor Nero. So Felix hired some men to murder the high priest, and he was stabbed to death in the temple in Jerusalem. This is the kind of man we're talking about in Felix. And so it might seem a bit odd, after all the evidence has been heard at the trial, that Felix and his Jewish wife, Drusilla, bring Paul up from the cells and have a long, in-depth conversation with him about his faith and beliefs. Sadly, it seems that Felix's desire to make money from the situation is all that's behind these discussions, as he's simply angling for a bribe. Paul refuses to enter into Felix's corruption and doesn't pay. Why do you think he won't buy his freedom? So what do you make of Felix? He seems well disposed to Paul, yet fails to deliver a verdict on his trial for 2 years in the hope that he'd pay a bribe. And as to these chats, are we clear on exactly what Paul is attempting to teach Felix? Do we understand about what is taught in the Bible about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come? And how do each of these affect the others? And how should we live as a result? And what of the trial itself? What do you make of Tertullus's prosecution and of Paul's defence? But the trial isn't over, and so next time it'll continue, but before a new judge. So until then, have a great cluster.